Hi, folks. Since last time, there were many things happening in the world, especially in the last couple of days here in the Central Europe. In the skies, skies are closed basically for a couple of hours every day, which changes a lot of the traffic, civil traffic here in this very moved area. So they have started the air defender drills from NATO a couple of days ago here in Germany, and the Baltops have finished yesterday. But the air defender will remain in place for one more week. Let's see what happens, because this is quite risky what they are doing. We have already talked about it, but the important thing is to put in place what is this means. I think it is one more tool to try to show strength from the Western part to the Russians, because the very aim of these drills were to fight major air power, which was Russia, which is Russia. And so this is a message when this counteroffensive, the so-called counteroffensive in Ukraine, has already started. This is clear, but it's not working as they planned. Neither the Kiev regime nor the NATO commando, which is behind, and we all know that this is quite official, actually, from the contact group of Ramstein, that every month meets here in Germany to give orders to the field in the Ukraine. That's why this is very complicated, because this is a war. This is happening in Ukraine between NATO, especially the Brits and the Americans, against Russia. This is not it is not conspiracy theory. This is what it is, where the Ukrainians have an agreement with the West that you put the weapons, you give us the weapons that we need, and the Westerns have agreed with that. And the Europeans, the Americans, the British have agreed with that, and we put the man. They have already lost 2 armies. They will start now the 3rd army, Ukrainian army, and they are ready to do it, to sacrifice their own people in change of weapons. This is the deal. This is the deal since these conversations in Istanbul failed, because the British by Boris Johnson have interfered and made this suggestion, and since then this is what we are seeing. So we are sacrificing, as Europeans from the European Union, we are sacrificing our economy, and the Ukrainians are sacrificing their men on the field. So this is a very rather unfair game, and it shows also why the Russians and the Ukrainians, as actually a Russian people, both of them, and ex-Soviet, are more prepared for this kind of war than the Europeans. What will happen tomorrow if there are no more men, Ukrainians, to fight the Russians? We have already talked about the possibility of, the strength of the European Union and the NATO and the West. There are 40 countries putting money all the time in the industrial machine behind the war. This means that in the long run, I think that Russia is the weak link of this relation, because it cannot keep this war for much longer. There is an interview today in the Stern magazine, one of the most popular, most important magazines here in Germany, with this Major John Spencer, an ex-military from American ex-military, that he is an advisor of the Pentagon or whatsoever, I don't know. This guy says that some things that you cannot understand. I mean, he says that the offensive, the winter offensive by the Russians was a failure, and the counteroffensive the Ukrainians is being very successfully. I don't understand what he wants to tell with that. So he just forgets the whole situation in Bakhmut, which was taken by the Russians and was for so long time said that was very strategic, very important, until they lost. When they lost, now they have relativized the importance, but the matter of fact is that they lost. The Ukrainians lost 70,000 men there in the meat grinder. And the guy then points out the corruption in the bribery in the Russian military, and he says that it's a paper tiger, but nonetheless it's very powerful on the field. I mean, it's but the thing that he points is that the war cannot be keep indefinitely by the Russians, and cannot even for much longer. And what I think now underlying this is what would happen if the Americans, the Allies, would start a problem in the islands on the extreme east of Russia, with the Japanese Kurils Islands. What would happen with such a situation? Things like this, no? Then the Russians would be very stressed. We have to think always that Russia's territory is very, very, very big, and they are using a small percentage of their power in Ukraine, and the Ukrainians are using everything, 100% what they have. But for one more other conflict, like in the extreme east or things like that, that would change things. And the question is, the Russians have been using their industry to back their weapon supplies and all these things so far with success. I think this is you cannot deny this. And by the other side, the Europeans are sacrificing their people, their middle classes. The societies are being tired of all these problems, the inflation, all the economic problems that will start piling up problems that we will see much more than we have seen and so far, because many things what will happen next winter in question of energy, now that we don't have our cheap supplier that was Russia. And here is one of the things that this author doesn't mention in this interview, but I ask myself and you guys, what will happen? What is the capacity of sacrifice by the Europeans and the Russians for a war? So the strength of the Europeans is that we are 30 countries, with the Australians, Japanese, and the Canadians and the Americans. 40 countries, let's say 30 from NATO plus 10, that can back the supply of weapons, money, training the Ukrainian troops, whatever. but the societies are very bourgeois. This welfare state that we are used to, and we are losing it rapidly, the society will start crumbling. And the Russians and the history tells us that they behave differently, completely differently in situations of war, because if they think in the Volksgeist, they're under, how do you say this, the conscience of the people thinks that they are right and they are doing the right thing, they won't give up until they win. So I think right now, many people on NATO are only waiting, and he also calls out this thing in this interview, that he thinks that the Ukrainians are not able to win Crimea in a short term, but he thinks that the Russians will lose the war soon. He says that, but Crimea won't be taken in the short term. So I don't know what he thinks about that. I think that many people on NATO strategists are only fighting now, I mean, using the Ukrainians to fight for a better position, for an hypothetical and actually inevitable sitting on table and making an agreement. So maybe they are already thinking that they will the Russians will keep Crimea, which is one goal from the English. I mean, the British want to take Crimea, and that's why they are so much involved in this war. But that would be the situation where at least the Russians, the British would save the face. I mean, not escalating until a major confrontation, direct confrontation. I don't know, but it seems like they are preparing and they are thinking for the first time in an agreement where now the problem is in what conditions. So they want to give fight until they have a better position for negotiations. Yesterday, there was finished the St. Petersburg Forum, International Economic Forum in St. Petersburg, Russia, with the presence of President Putin. This is a forum that is already in, I don't know, many years. They have been doing this. Forum is gaining always more importance in the last 3-4 years that I have seen on the news. But this year, of course, with the special problem of the war and sanctions, and many people doesn't go there because of the sanctions. Even last year, I think, or 2 years ago, there was back then the Prime Minister of Austria, Kurz. He was there, was the only one from Europe. This year there was nobody, and only from the global south. But that is very important, because this is how the world is being reshaped economically, I mean. So, and Putin gave a lecture on the end of the forum, and talked about the war and talked about economy and things like that. And you might think a lot about what he says. I mean, Ukrainian armed forces are attacking several areas at the moment and have lost several tanks. The battle continues, but they don't stand a chance. Well, he gives for granted that this war is won by the Russians. Many questions that you ask yourself: why if the Russians are so confident that they have won this war, why didn't they get Kharkiv, Odessa, Mykolaiv, all these important cities? This is a question that you have to ask yourself. Why they are still in the same place, with the exception of Bakhmut, which was very important, but generally speaking, the same position as 1 year ago. What is the trick behind all this? But what they are preparing, or this is what you get from it. This is where the war will have to finish, because Donbass, this is Russia, the West is Ukraine. Let's finish this before it gets very nasty. These are questions that you ask yourself, but Putin is very confident that the Ukrainians have no chance. But the question is not the Ukrainians have no chance. What happens if tomorrow the Poles jump in, like Rasmussen asks? Then the Russians have to use a completely different concept for this war, and it will be very dangerous for the whole world. I mean, so Putin says here that soon Ukraine will run out of its own equipment and will be fighting with only foreign equipment. But that was one of the aims of NATO, is that they de-Sovietize Ukraine from their military concept, from their military equipment, from their military doctrine. So they are getting what they want. They will get rid of all Soviet things and everything from Ukraine. And then you will have a Western Ukraine for the first time in history. A non-Russian Ukraine, in culturally, militarily, politically. So that is not a big deal for NATO. This is the problem for our politicians here in the European Union and NATO. They don't have empathy with us, the people who have to support this war with money, with our taxes, with our impoverishment of Europe. They will get this week. The European Commission have notified that will raise again their salaries for next year, for the second time since the invasion of Ukraine. They have increased their salaries in 15%, and now more than 15%. Ursula von der Leyen now has a salary of 30,000. Next year will be 36 or 35,000 euros brutto. So they don't care about us. They will put a lot of money in Ukraine, a lot of weapons. As far as it gets, we will hear of famine or people in poverty here in Europe. This is not a problem for them, and they will change the concept of Ukraine. Maybe they lose their territories in the east, but they will have a country bordering Russia to make problems with Russia in the long term. I think this is what they are doing. In the military field, they have de-Sovietized. They are de-Sovietizing Ukraine in doctrine, everything, in equipment, in strategy, everything. The whole concept of the Ukrainian military now will be NATO, and then it's just a matter of time to be de jure NATO, because this is de facto NATO, and this is one of the things that they are now debating. If in Vilnius they will join NATO. I don't think they will join NATO, but if this keeps like this, next year they join NATO. Even if this is again the charter of the Atlantic Charter that doesn't allow a country in a conflict. Doesn't matter. They change the perception, and people are tired. People are they are fed up with all these things, and they say, "Okay, join NATO," and it is already NATO. They have NATO weapons. They have NATO training, NATO commando, everything. So I don't know if President Putin has seen this in this perspective. What is the problem of they don't have more Soviet weapons? What is the problem? Now they have NATO weapons. This is what the NATO hawks want. Then Putin says that last year the merchandise exports reached the highest figure in 10 years. $592 billion. So the Russians have exported more than before in 10 years. I believe this. I mean, the sanctions are not being successful as these European politicians planned against Russia. It is being a disastrous against our middle classes here in Europe. The hope is that we in the middle classes here in Europe, the core of the society, will go to the streets and will demand the end of this political class. But we haven't seen them yet. We see here, there, in France, the yellow vests and things like that. But at the end, I don't see for a predictable future to see some massive. It can happen, but the system itself has a lot of tricks, and they will put, for example, all this content working for them. I mean, they will push extremist groups from the right side that they say many important things, but at the end they will come with a much more neoliberal agenda that will benefit the system. The same guys that they can get rid of these guys, the social democrats, the Christian Democrats, and they will put neo-fascists. No, what is the problem? See what happened now in Italy. This woman came like a neo-fascist. We will change the system. We will make what was she said in the blockade, naval blockade against the immigrants and stuff. She opened the legs directly, right afterwards, to European Union, to the NATO, to the enterprise, the big industry in Italy, opening the borders to millions of thousands of Africans to have cheap labor, cheap manpower that the industry needs. And so she is, they will come with this kind of solutions here in Europe, here in Germany, in Spain. They will come with the rabious anti-system ultras, and then they will do nothing, absolutely nothing, totally under control of the big money. So yeah, Putin talks here about some things that are important regarding still to the Ukrainian war. On the NATO countries' desire for Russia to reduce the number of nuclear weapons. Well, they wish that, so go to hell with them, he says. To hell with it. So they have lost the goodwill with the Europeans. They have seen that NATO countries, European countries, are not to be taken seriously, and they say go go to hell. We will do now whatever we want because we don't trust you anymore. So basically it's this, and I understand him. Washington, instead of stabilizing contacts with Moscow, has chosen to send weapons to Kiev. We will burn everything they hand over. We will see what to do next. Well, we will have an answer, but this answer is sensitive and the enemy knows it. Okay, but this is kind of very, talking about between the lines of nuclear weapons. So far, it was only by Dmitry Medvedev. But now Putin is talking about this more overtly. Who am I to say that it's too soon to him to talk about this kind of solutions? But when you listen the president talking about this, so doesn't he have much more other tools in hands in between? The first nuclear charges have been delivered to the territory of Belarus. The operation will be completed before the end of this year. Here again, nuclear weapons in Belarus, but this is not only Russia doing this. The Americans did before, NATO did before, deploying their missile systems to Bulgaria and Romania. This is the reply, actually. And this is scary. President Biden is a grown man and an experienced politician. It is not for me to teach him. Let him do what he thinks is best. We will do what is in Russia's interest. And everyone will have to reckon with that. Let's see what happens, because this week there was a cyber attack on a lot of American agencies. And actually they have put it in high alert. The agency for the security of critical installations in the US, I don't remember the name, CISA or NISA, I don't remember, that was being put it in high alert. This was Thursday, and yesterday, also Friday, came President Biden and talked about the CISA, the agency, cybersecurity agency, was on high alert because it was being under attack by hackers. And Biden came to the press and pointed to the Russian intelligence, a major, and he said openly that they expect a major attack by the Russians that will come. He said it will come sooner than later, and that would be a different kind of war. Cyber war would leave critical infrastructure in the United States, maybe in Europe, without functioning. And you can imagine what are the consequences of this that could unleash the chaos in our societies, especially in big cities, dependent on everything that is electronic and communications, systems of delivery, all the chains of delivery chains for supermarkets, everything. So water in the houses, everything. That could be a major thing that we wish that doesn't happen. So again, what we can take from all this is that right now would be important to set a date and like the Chinese said, right now a truce, immediate truce, no more war, and to sit, and then diplomacy. But that is not to be seen soon, unfortunately. Let's see what this brings in the next days, and other developments, especially that one between Saudi Arabia and China. Some major steps that are being done towards a multipolar world. Yeah, this is being already too long. I think it's the longest episode done so far here on the channel. Keep informed here. Stay tuned. Smash the like button, please. Help us to go up, and subscribe if you haven't so done it. And see you soon.